Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation by the Academy of Visual Arts, Hong Kong Baptist University. So I'm the chair for the first panel of this conference. So in panel one, actually, we have two presenters to present their works. Each of them have 30 minutes for the presentation, and afterwards, we will have 10 minutes Q&A section. So for our first presenter is also our organizer of this conference, is Jiří Jákl from Heidelberg University. His presentation topic is Pigeons, Doves, and Creation in Javanese Religions. So Jiří, please.
Sharon, thank you very much for your introduction. My paper is The title of my paper is a little bit misleading because I devised it a long time ago when I really wished to focus on columbidae, on doves and pigeons. But then I realized that I should work in a more wider framework, as my specialization is Old Javanese language, and I work on representations of birds in Old Javanese literature. Especially in kakavins, so-called kakavins, which are poems, metrical poems written in Old Javanese language in Java between the 9th and 15th century, and later also in Bali, where they were produced, these kakavins, at least since the 16th century, and even today the tradition is not dead in Bali, and we still have several persons who are actively composing new poems. So even though these poems are composed in a language that's more than 1,000 years old, it's still not dead. It's a living language, and it's also the language of Balinese Hindu rituals. So basically, Old Javanese is immensely important as a kind of Latin in Java, I would say. Pre-modern and early modern Southeast Asia abounded with birds. Visible and audible at most time of day, the birds occupied all the domains of land, sea, and air. In abundance and diversity, we can only dream of today. The evidence of Old Javanese language fully supports this view. Wild and domesticated birds were not only a source of food, but the Javanese were much interested in birds for non-material reasons as well. That's the point we've already emphasized in our co-introduction here. Javanese admired and read significance into their flight, their color, and their songs and calls. Regarding human birds in interactions today, we are continually forming new relationships, as I've already emphasized. You can mention popular bird watching, which is now increasingly popular in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, when tens of thousands of bird watchers are basically on regular weekend spotting places like Karawang in Javanese, in Western Java. We can also mention much less popular bird-assisted therapy, which is developing into a new field of healing, and genetically engineered bird hybrids. So before I give you some evidence on the richness of the columbidae, that's hence doves and pigeons in Java, I would like to draw your attention to a wider picture first and emphasize the immense importance of bird lore in Old Javanese literature. It's through reading of Old Javanese texts that I realized how omnipresent birds are in the text, and it's actually quite striking compared to other literatures from Southeast Asia. We are blessed to have this ancient tradition in Java, while in other parts of Southeast Asia, like Cambodia or Thailand, the earliest traces of literature can only be traced to the, let's say, 15th, 16th century. While in Java, we can draw on sources as old as 1,000 years. So once again, the heritage is really important, and Indonesia, as well as foreign research institutions, should realize that this is really important literary tradition that deserves full attention. And birds are the proof that how creative Javanese poets were. Birds are surprisingly frequent participants in all Javanese literature, and in recent decades, scholarship has traced their appearance as allegories and metaphors representing human relations, but also Javanese religious views, and most interestingly, as metaphors of Javanese politics. I expect that Andrea Acre will provide later today some of his most recent research on this fascinating topic, because in all Javanese literature, birds are often used as allegories or metaphors of political relationships between early Javanese kingdoms and Javanese rulers. Let me now introduce just a few numbers. In their recent survey of birds represented in the Kakavin Ramayana, which is the oldest piece of Kakavin poetry we have, it dates to the late 9th or early 10th century CE. Mulianta and his colleagues have identified some 84 bird names, which is a lot, considering that we are in the 9th century literary record. We have 84 bird names recorded in only one poem. They trace 82 of these bird species to scientific level using Latin names, which is a little bit more doubtful, but still many birds can indeed be traced their scientific counterparts, living species. So there is certainly a difference between a literary bird and a biological bird, but well, we are all excited to trace literary birds or birds depicted on temporary reliefs, the living species. That's just natural. People are curious. Elsewhere in their study, Mulianta and his colleagues claim that of these 84 names, just 13 names can be traced to Sanskrit or other Indic language. It simply means that bird lore in old Javanese literature is almost completely Austronesian, it's native, while we do have a share of Indic loans used for birds. So Indian birds or birds of Indian origin, be it Sanskrit or Prakrit terms, are used here and there for domestic birds, as well as for birds that are obviously known only from Indian literature. There are several such birds present in old Javanese literature. So birds that have obviously no counterpart among the living birds found in Java, but they were introduced as a kind of literary bird species. To appreciate this richness of old Javanese evidence, let me make a rough comparison between the richness of bird fauna depicted in textual and visual record of two other much better documented pre-modern cultures. In a now classical study of birds in ancient Egypt, published in 1988, Houlihan, who was a famous historian of ancient Egyptian fauna, has identified about 72 different wild and domestic bird species, which are depicted in Egyptian iconography and mentioned in Egyptian texts. So we see that in ancient Egypt, with all of its ancient vast tradition, a vast corpus of texts, totally incomparable to what we have from Java, but of course with the fauna that's much less richer than is the fauna of tropical Java. Houlihan identified 72 different wild and domestic bird species, while in Kakavin Ramayana we have 84 of them. In only one Javanese poem, we have more birds mentioned than in all ancient Egyptian tradition. To give you another example, Tamisto, in his study of Roman and early Byzantine art, made also his count. He mentions 70 Roman and early Byzantine period mosaics, glass mosaics, as his source, which is quite a lot, and which he studied in detail. Tamisto identified 346 depictions of birds on these Roman and early Byzantine mosaics, which have, according to Tamisto, yielded some 27 bird species, which is not that much probably. In his study of birds in the vast corpus of ancient Greek culture, that's my third source, Minot notes the special importance of Aristophanes' comedies, so Greek comedies of Aristophanes, to the study of birds lore, and observes that if you include all the single mentions, the total species count in Aristophanes is about 75. So once again, we can make a comparison. compared to much better documented ancient cultures, birds in old Javanese literature are incredibly numerous. The mentions of birds are incredibly abundant in old Javanese literature, which is of course in the line with the importance, especially symbolic importance of birds in Austronesian world and old Javanese literature in particular. Unlike in some other parts of Southeast Asia, at the moment there's only one bird species known to be endemic to Java that came to be extinct in historic times. We can see the bird on the screen. This is the famous Javan lapwing, the bird that's not been spotted since 1940s, so we expect that it's been hunted to extinction, basically, eaten to extinction. The handsome bird had formerly inhabited grassy patches among the marshes of northwest Java and river deltas of the southeast Java, where it was, as I said, last spotted in late 1940s. Okay, after this brief, hopefully not too boring introduction, I would go to the major topic of my paper, pigeons and parakeets, and pigeons and parakeets, which I would discuss in combination because I find it useful for the tasks I would like to achieve. The lexicon for doves and pigeons is particularly rich. I mean, old Javanese lexicon for pigeons is particularly rich. There are no less than 10 bird words for them. These are Dara, Darapati, Harawa, Kitiram, Puputer, Putir, Prokutut, Walik, Vurukutut, and Vuruvuru. And obviously there are a few other words that I've missed, but that are not clear at all. Indonesia is indeed famous for its amazing variety of pigeons, and Java has a long tradition of keeping pigeons. Doves and pigeons were raised for food, as sacrificial animals, for communication and pleasure, and for oracular prophecies. Due to its high content of nitrogen and phosphorus, pigeons' waste served as an excellent fertilizer for deficient soils and was utilized as fertilizer until modern times. Men attracted wild pigeons by providing food and a safe place to nest. However, the antiquity of dove keeping in the Indo-Malay world is not known. What we can say with certainty is that doves and pigeons are very well depicted on Javanese temple reliefs. Several species obviously are depicted on temple reliefs, and they are mentioned in literature. The inscriptional evidence, which is among the earliest for pigeons we have, shows that at least two types of pigeons are mentioned as farm birds. So in old Balinese inscriptions that we can date to the 10th and 11th centuries. So basically already by the 10th century, the Javanese people were farming doves, not just getting them in the wild, but they had a kind of pigeon keeping culture. Wisman Christie, a famous historian of early Java, takes the Buahan inscription as an example. The Buahan inscription was issued in Bali in 994, hence in the late 10th century, and it's among the earliest testimonies of breeding doves and other birds in this part of the world. Let me quote Wisman Christie in full for this testimony, for this epigraphical testimony. Now I will quote. The Buahan inscription of 994 adds domestic pigs, chickens, turtle doves, wild pigeons, and forest chickens to this list. So what Wisman Christie means is that by the late 10th century, to the much better known domesticated animals like cattle, already some farm birds were added. And she mentions, or the inscription mentions chickens, called hayam in Old Javanese, turtle doves, which are called manuk kitiran, doves, putir, wild pigeons, vuru, and forest chickens, hayam alas. Okay, so we see that already in this early source we have at least 3 names for doves. Doves and pigeons are also frequently depicted on temple monuments and in modern Javanese art. Can can we display figure number 2, please? Oh yeah. It's obviously not the best photograph, but it's my own photograph, and it's from Candi Jago in Eastern Java, and it shows the roof of a pavilion with two dove-like species of birds, interpreted usually as doves, perching on the eaves of the roof. Art historians generally believe that depictions of a couple of birds, and some of them are certainly doves, on the roofs of pavilions are marking these pavilions either as bedrooms or as places where ascetics can assemble. So it's actually interesting that doves are quite often selected for this symbolism. And my own observation from Candi Panataram and Candi Jago, two temples in East Java, built in the reliefs were definitely produced in the 14th century. My observation shows that these are really bedrooms. So we can quite safely say that doves were marking the pavilion as a bedroom, which may otherwise not be completely clear from other details of the depiction, but it's completely clear from all Javanese literature. So basically, I use this combination of reading literature against temple reliefs to prove that doves were really symbolic of, couples sharing their bedroom, obviously. Doves and pigeons are also frequently depicted on temple monuments, owing to the associations of pigeons with the Prophet Muhammad. Now we move to the early Islamic Java. Pigeons perched and fed on the Prophet's shoulder as he preached. Islam respected and favored pigeons. And in modern Java, pigeons are among the most popular pet birds, actually. Most of the depictions of ancient art seem to be those of the common pigeon of Columbidae. So the very common pigeon you can even spot in Europe, which has global distribution, seems to be really the most common pigeon in the Indo-Malay world as well. The most common term used for pigeons in Old Javanese is dara. It's glossed by Zoetmilde, the author of Old Javanese English Dictionary, quite simply as pigeon or dove. In modern Javanese, we further hear about dara bandangan, dara kaplakan, dara gambir, dara kucir, etc. There are many types of, qualifying words for this dara major root. So it reflects the variety of pigeons in modern Javanese culture as well. Already the Kakabin Ramayana that I've already mentioned, the earliest piece of Old Javanese poetry, established a quite strong link between the peaceful life of people and religious persons in particular, and dara doves. So we are now back to the relief, and I read it against Old Javanese literature that basically depicts, even in the earliest text, which is the Kakabin Ramayana, dara, pigeons, as marking a place where ascetics dwell. Let me quote a pertinent passage in which doves share the same space with humans when they roost at the roof of a pavilion of a hermitage, which is occupied by the famous sage Barada. Now I quote from Old Javanese text in translation. Barley and millet are to the north and south of the library, and pikatan birds are not afraid, remarkably tame. Above the sage is where the dara doves sleep, and preen themselves in a flock by the side of the terrace. So it's quite interesting to see that doves were symbolic of both ascetics and married couples, which is quite interesting combination. Voikas in 1958 identified darapati, another word for pigeons, as turtle dove. And Santoso, a little bit later, identified darapati as Columba palumbos. Andrea Acri has recently suggested that there may be so far an unidentified association between the form and plumage of this bird called Dharapati and the dress of Hindu Javanese ascetics. Not just dress, but also their behavior. Andrea Jákl says it's probably the outward appearance of these Shaiva ascetics as well as their behavior that justified the poet's choice of the Dharapati as their allies. The wood pigeon or ring dove, Streptopelia risoria in Latin. It's ash-gray colored with black color around the neck. This intriguing association is most probably right. In Java today, this species is sometimes referred to as puter, and the most possible reference to this name is what has its Latin scientific name, Columba livia. That's basically the common pigeon of Columbidae, known as Merpati in Malay and Japati in Sundanese. That's the language of Western Java, Sundanese language. Columba livia is the wild rock pigeon, by far the most common species of the Columbidae, habiting mainly rocky landscapes. Turtle doves neither lay eggs nor hatches its young in an aviary. That's quite interesting, actually. They have been traditionally housed on simple mat platforms on which they had a constant supply of millet to fatten them, with nets spread around to prevent them flying about. In my view, the wild, untamed rock pigeon is also the Dharapati of all Javanese metaphors. There it's likened to Shaiva ascetics. What leads me to this conclusion? Both the wild rock pigeon, that's the pigeon that commonly nests on the cliffs of South Javanese coast, for example, and the Shaiva ascetic would take shelter in caves at the seashore and feed on wild food, such as wild millet. So what I see as a linking point is that the birds, if I'm right, to identify them as wild rock pigeons, are basically nesting at the cliffs. And ascetics in ancient Javanese art are so often depicted nesting or living in caves. So basically there may be a kind of link that's been so far not fully appreciated. But that's a matter of another research, and possibly someone else more well equipped to do such comparative research. Another interesting Old Javanese term for pigeons is kitiran. Robson and Vivisono in their Javanese English dictionary gloss kitiran as a kind of turtle dove. Zoetmilde in his Old Javanese dictionary glosses kitiran as particular kind of pigeon, probably turtle dove. A clue to the identity of this bird can be given in the Middle Javanese text Wang Bang Videya, where the prince Raden Singhamatra and on one of his hunting trips takes shelter under the Kapidiach tree. We are talking about the text from the 16th century written in the language called Middle Javanese, which is the next phase of the Javanese language after Old Javanese. So this gentleman has a dream under the Kapidiach tree, where he imagines his hunt would be success. He says to his servant, or to one of his servants that are present, I had dreamed that I caught a white kitiran and then put it in a cage. In Middle Javanese, Paksi kitiran petak hanyar supanjara. His attendants smile, noting that he should perhaps soon take a wife. So there is this metaphor of dreaming about hunting a white kitiran and putting it into a cage, and about marriage, about getting a wife. The reference to its white color, to the white color of this kitiran, it's mentioned as being of white color, would probably point in the direction of a fully domesticated pigeon. At least that's what I learned from ornithologists who say that white colors of birds are mostly marks of full domestication. Next, there is a term vuru vuru. Zoetmilde identifies vuru vuru in his Old Javanese dictionary as a kind of wild pigeon. the translation that's been widely accepted since then. Barrett Jones, another scholar of early Java, knows Vuru as a place name, saying the word refers to the pigeon or dove. Tiu and Robson translate Vuru Vuru at one occasion in Old Javanese Bomantaka, the text from the 12th century, as wild pigeon, which is indeed its meaning in modern language. Andrea Akri, on the other hand, argues that it's a common name of the pigeon. Fletcher translates Vuru Vuru as the Vuru Vuru pigeons. And Mulyanto and his colleagues, in the study that I've already mentioned for its richness on bird lore in the Kakavin Ramayana, they observe this could possibly refer to Kaluenas, Dukula and Treton from the Columbidae. So very particular kinds of pigeons, very particular biological species. In Kakavin Ramayana, the bird is depicted explicitly as living in tree and eating fruit. The clue to the identity of this pigeon may be actually provided by the 15th or 16th century text called Anyang Nirarta, which is the Old Javanese poem written by the eponymous poet Anyang Nirarta, famous for his early activities in Bali. So he's among the persons believed to have transferred Hinduism from Java to a particular form of Hinduism from Javanese Majapahit kingdom to Bali. So in the Anyang Nirarta, the Vuru Vuru nest at the seashore. It's quite possible that Vuru Vuru refers to the Sunda-colored dove. Can we see the picture number 3? That would be the bird. That's one of the most beautiful Javanese doves. It's so-called Sunda-colored dove. The bird is very big, even though the photograph probably doesn't look like that. It's wild pigeon. It's not domesticated variety. This is fully wild pigeon that typically nests on the sea cliffs and small islands close to the seashore. So I would say that Vuru Vuru is indeed a kind of wild pigeon, and more specifically, probably Sunda-colored dove, as it's said in this text we just mentioned, Anyang Nirarta, to be nesting at the seashore. And Sunda-colored dove is endemically living at the seashore, so it's quite fitting. It's wild dove, and it's occupying the seashore, so we may have two clues that the species, that what's called Vuru Vuru in Old Javanese is actually Sunda-colored dove. Okay, let me move to another Old Javanese term for doves, which is Prukutut, which has been identified as turtle dove, hence having the same biological identity as Kitiran. Zukmilde glossis Prukutut, specifically as Tutur malacensis. Mulyanto and his colleagues suggest that the name Perkutut in Malay, or Kutut in Javanese, and Prukutut in Sundanese, all related obviously, refer specifically to the zebra dove of Columbidae. Zebra dove is another quite beautiful dove. I don't have the photo, but it's quite spectacular as well. Finally, we have to mention the enigmatic dove called in Old Javanese texts Harawa. Ewing Ball already in 1902 referred to Harawa as Columba Enea. Santoso identifies Harawa simply as dove. Mulyanto say that in the Middle Javanese text Navaruchi, this bird, the bird called Harawa, is characterized as living in trees and having harsh voice. This species can possibly refer to Dukula genus of Columbidae. There are 3 species of Dukula in Java Island. The green imperial pigeon, then the bird that has no English name, but it's called in Latin Ducula lacernulata, and then the Javanese imperial pigeon. So one of these can possibly be identified as Old Javanese Harawa. 2 other species of Ducula are resident in islands neighboring Java. So that would be enough, the part of doves. So I hope to have at least in 2 species, in two species, I've tried to be more precise about their biological identity. And now I will move to parrots. Parrots as typical pet birds, especially among the Malays and Javanese. Pigeons were popular pet birds, as we've seen. Can we see number 4, please? This leads me to the little researched question of the early history of keeping pet birds in island Southeast Asia. So what is the link between parrots and pigeons? It's quite obvious. Both pigeons and parrots, one of them beautiful red-green colored parrot we see on a Javanese manuscript illumination from the 19th century. The link between parrots and pigeons is obviously that there may be more than one link, but the more obvious link is that both were used as pets in early Java and in later Java as well. And there's been so little research on pet keeping in Javanese history, even though very many animal and bird species were used as pets. It's been completely unresearched topic so far. Keeping pet birds has a very long tradition in Java and in Southeast Asia generally. Already Chinese sources from the 9th century mention sending of parrots from Java to the Chinese court as part of diplomatic gifts, which is only natural considering that Java is rich in biological species, including parrots. So they were in high demand in Chinese court as early as the 9th century and actually much earlier, as we will see. Pet birds are also mentioned in Old Javanese Kakavin Ramayana from the 9th century. The earliest mention of export of parrots from Java I found is in the 7th century Chinese text that says that Tang Emperor Taizong commissioned a rhapsody poem to be written about a prized parrot that he was gifted. It was a gift from the kingdom of Champa. Champa is a Hindu state in what's today central Vietnam. So it even predates any Javanese evidence. So we see that as early as by the 7th century, parrots were prized gifts and were sent from the Indo-Malay world, in our case Java, to China, and from Champa as well, which is also Austronesian kingdom, by the way, which was Austronesian kingdom. Interestingly, different ethnic groups in Southeast Asia often preferred different pets, which I find as probably the most interesting point. For example, in Singapore around 1900, that's at the beginning of the 20th century, the Chinese kept magpie robins and oriental white eyes. The Malays kept red-whiskered bulbuls and various species of doves, including the spotted dove and the zebra dove. The Javanese community kept hanging parakeets and pink-headed doves. So here we see that particular ethnic groups identify themselves with particular bird pets, which is quite nice. Even in one city, you have them mingle, but still keeping their ethnic-related pets. The Javanese community kept, I apologize. Sometimes unexpected bird species figure as pets. For example, the young of the lesser adjutant stork, that's the kind of stork that's common in Java as well. The young of this lesser adjutant stork are often taken from the nest by Malays and Visayas in Kalimantan and reared as pets. Harrison, who's the source of this observation, says that they like to follow their owners about. So obviously children in many cases, dusting, bowing, and clattering the mandibles. As they grow old, says Harrison, they are sold as a gourmet dish for the Chinese New Year. So here we have a pet ending as a gourmet dish after it's not considered pet anymore, right? The young Oriental darters and young terns are also reared as pets in some part of Kalimantan. On the other hand, in all Javanese texts, pets are generally forbidden to be consumed. For example, Old Javanese Vratishasana, which is a manual for the proper behavior of ascetics and religious figures generally, this Vratishasana, the Vratishasana text forbids the bhikkhus. Bhikkhu is Old Javanese term for ascetic figure or Buddhist monk basically as well. So bhikkhus are forbidden to consume the birds subsumed under the category Pakshinara Shabda, which translates as speaking bird. So basically includes all kinds of parakeets. The text names two of them, Atatsyung and Jalak. Jalak is not parakeet, but it's also a bird that can be easily taught the human speech. Now let me turn more specifically to parrots and their kin. Parrots, along with crows, ravens, magpies, and jays, are clearly among the most intelligent birds. Their ability to imitate human speech enhances their popularity as pets. There's no doubt about that. There are several Old Javanese terms for parrots, including atat, bayan, probably chot or chat, kakatu. This sounds famous, right? Kakatu is Austronesian term that became worldwide used. Nuri and Suka. Parrots figure not only in Old Javanese literature, but there is also a long tradition of the depiction of parrots on Javanese temple monuments. Can we see the picture number 5, please? This is a depiction of two parrots from Candi Kidal, which is a temple in East Java, ornamented by reliefs that date to between the late 13th and early 14th century, I guess. But maybe some art historians may complain on my identification, on my dating of these temple reliefs. But it's clearly one of the most beautiful I've seen. We can mention a striking Central Javanese tradition of depicting parrots in the wide-opened jaws of the stone makaras, which flank the stairs to monuments such as Borobudur. So at stairs of some monuments, you do have these stone makaras with open jaws, and inside the jaw you can see a parrot. There is obviously not a single function of depicting parrots in Hindu Javanese art, and I believe that Ellen will tell much more about this topic in her presentation. For sure, parrots were attributes of the god Kama, the god of love. They are indeed, in India, one of the attributes of Kama, but they also decorate Buddhist bronze temple bells. Shown often in lifelike poses, parrots and festoon motif is a common repetitive element of Central Javanese architectural decoration. Can we see number 6, please? These are terracotta figures, the one on the right and the second one from the left. These are terracotta figures from the Trovulan Museum, Majapahit period, that's 14th or probably 15th century, of so-called kinaris, human-bird hybrids, which typically display parrot-like plumage. If you observe carefully, their wings are very often based on the wings of parrots. So this is yet another element where parrots somehow slip into the iconography of Hindu Javanese temple art. Let me now discuss some of the most interesting terms for parrots and cockatoos in Old Javanese. I have 5 minutes, so I will be brief. Old Javanese atat is often translated as kakatu, but its description in the Krishnayana, Old Javanese court poem from the 13th century, leaves little doubt that atat must be classed among the parrots cited there. So it's clearly not a minach, as supposed by translators so far, but it's kakatu. Now, the only resident species of this family is Psittacula alexandri, a very famous green-colored parrot. The word is cognate to betet in Malay, I guess. That atat is related somehow to Malay betet. In Krishnayana, the author describes green flying parrots, atat, and dragons. That's my source, the Krishnayana, for this claim. That it's basically Alexandrian, famous green, red parrot we've seen already on the Javanese manuscript illumination before. In Krishnayana, he also describes green flying parrots and dragons painted or batiked on pieces of silk textiles that look very realistic and would decorate a wedding bed during the ceremony conducted for the Princess Rukmini. So parrots decorate, in this case, a textile that's used in the wedding ceremony. Again, obviously as a symbol of the god Kama, god of love. At the head panel of the bed, there is also an image of Kama, Pata Kama Deva in Old Javanese, as the passage reads, which implies that in ancient Java, resident yet exotic atat was the parrot of Kama, the symbol of Kama. Quite unexpectedly, in modern Javanese, atat, but also slindit, are personal names given to girls. According to Dutch linguist Uhlenbeck, both atat and sindit are among the female names, let me quote Uhlenbeck, positively indicative of a low social category. This shift I find very interesting. I mean, we face the shift from high status Hindu Kama symbol, parrot as a symbol of god Kama, the name for a low class girl. I don't have any explanation for this shift. Another interesting Old Javanese term for parrots is bayan. Zoetmulder glosses bayan as parrot, which has been adopted by the subsequent scholarship. Mulyanta and his colleagues claim in their study that in Malay ethno-ornithological vocabulary, the bird known as Nuri Bayan possibly refers to Loriculus galgulus of Psitticidae, so a kind of quite exotic parrot, which is, however, today resident in Java, and maybe an introduction in historical times from India. Uniquely, the Sumana Santaka, a text composed around 1200, so at the onset, at the beginning of the 13th century, gives us a very vivid description of Princess Indumati as a toddler in play. Let me quote from stanza 10:30. I will only quote translation. She was quick to walk and could toddle about. Mischievously, she would try again and again to stand up and straightway fall down again. Fond of laughing, she could chatter like a parrot. She could chatter like a parrot. And when asked where she was, clearly she covered her eyes. All day long she played in the dust. That's, by the way, what parrots do. And was cross when she was told to stop. That was sure to bring tears. It was a delight to see her when she was given a fright. She would suddenly stamp her feet and, without saying a word, then give the other person a scare. So that's the impression of the author, Pumonaguna, the author of this text, of princess. So again, we have princess, high status person, related to parrot. Unlike in modern Javanese, atat name. The fact that bayan is not found in Java may indicate, in my view, we are to imagine a kept foreign species of parrot. Bayan in Old Javanese refers rather specifically to pet parrots, in my view. Parrots are immensely popular in Buddhism as well, and there may be a connection in this Sumana Santaka, Bayan and Buddhism, but this is another topic and it needs more research. My time is over, so that's basically all what I wish to tell you today. Thank you.